What is up? Travis with TCustomz Productionz, TCustomz.com. In today's video, I'm going to be answering a viewer question on layering drum samples, in particular kick drums. This also apply to your snare drums. A lot of times we are layering multiple samples, one shots or breaks or whatever it is to get a bigger sound, to get more punch in our kicks and snares and snap and get them to cut through the mix. Layering is one of the most simple and straightforward ways to do that. However, if you're not careful when you do this, you could actually have adverse effects on your sounds. You can make them sound flat. Maybe you've experienced this before, and I want to talk through several bullet points in this video that hopefully can help you, at least have helped me, and hopefully you can apply some. This was left as a question on the 5 tips for how to use drum breaks in hip hop beats video that I shot several weeks back. That will be linked in the description if you want to check it out if you haven't, because there will be some overlap, so some related points from both videos, so I think it would be a good complement to this if you haven't seen that. All the drum sample packs I'll be using as demonstration in this video will be linked in the description, as well as the drum break pack that I included in the previous tutorial. So the question is, thank you for this video, all of your other videos too. I have a question. When I layer my own kick on top of a drum break, I always get phasing issues. When I throw my kick on top of it, it just sounds weird and flat. It's like every hit on a break is different, and this gives me a hard time when I'm trying to use breaks. Some of the hits sound good, but others don't. Do you have any tip or advice for this? So the question is being asked in the context of drum breaks and layering on top of drum breaks, which was again addressed in that previous video, but I also want to extend this. I want to talk about breaks and layering sounds of breaks, but it's also going to apply if you're layering your one shots together, and in particular when it comes to phasing. Number one, when using breaks or using any kind of drum samples, all drums are not created equal, and so there's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to getting your kicks when you're layering them or getting your sounds to sound good together. There's a lot of different variables that go into that, but again, I have several tips here listed that I hope can help. So my number one tip, and you kind of alluded to it in your question, is making sure that your drum samples are aligned. Making sure that your kicks, when they're hitting down, if you've got a drum break like I have up here as an example I'll play through in just a second, and I have some secondary kicks that I want to layer on top of that, make sure that they're actually hitting down together. And in this case, I'm looking at these sounds in audio format, so that way you can actually see the waveforms. A lot of times we're programming drums in MIDI, we might lose sight of that. You might have your drum break in audio, and then you're programming a kick pattern to layer on top of that in MIDI format, but without being able to see and kind of hone in on what the waveforms look like together, or just sheer experimentation with shifting the sounds, maybe losing some context onto how the drums are actually aligning versus what your perception is. So I've got a drum break, 2-bar loop. Let's play this back first, and then we'll get into layering some additional kicks on top of that. So the break's got a cool groove. It sounds okay as is, but I definitely would like to enhance it. I'd like to layer some drums on top of this. And so I've created a separate kick track. Again, this is an audio track. I drug in one of the samples from one of my drum sample packs and have basically created the same kick pattern that is in the break. So if I solo that out and just play the one-shot kick track, so now I'm going to play these together and just listen closely to what these sound like together. Overall, I like the tone of this kick supplemented with this because this has a little more sub bass in it. But one of the problem areas you may have heard was this right here. And again, this is going back to phasing. This should be pretty obvious, but I just want to make this point clear because even though this is kind of extreme, this is kind of an extreme delay and it's very obvious to hear, a lot of times just it could be a micro adjustment that you make. It could be just shifting over, you know, your sound just 5 milliseconds or 10 milliseconds. And you may not be working as much with your drum tracks, in particular your one shot in audio format like I am here. I'm using this again just as a demonstration, but I'll show an example in a minute. I've got a kick and snare track that are programmed in MIDI, and I'll give you an example of one way to fix it there as well. There's different ways to fix this. It could be you going back to the drum break if it is in audio, coming over to this kick here and saying, okay, this is not exactly on the grid, moving this over, testing this out. But in short, you just want to make sure that your kicks are aligned, that they're working well together, that they sound right. And if something's off, you can just manually, you can test it out. If you don't know, if you don't have a visual representation, or you don't know, you can just manually test it out. If you have separate tracks, you can set up a delay and say, okay, I want to shift this by 5 milliseconds, or I want to shift this by 10 milliseconds, or whatever. And you can test things out like that. Like you mentioned, there are going to be a lot of variations in the break. So this first kick may not sound exactly the same as this kick, may not sound exactly the same as, have the same tonality as this ghost kick. And so when you're layering, you're going to have to keep all those things, take all those things into consideration if you want to use the drum break as is. In this track here, I kind of corrected this first track. I have just now gone in and manually nudged this. So you'll see that these kicks are somewhat aligned. They're not perfect. I've shifted this over just a little bit. And the same with this last ghost kick. Now when I play these back, you should notice a significant difference, specifically on this part right in here. The velocities are something else you'll have to take into consideration. So you'll notice that these ghost kicks don't have the same volume as the primary kicks, obviously. So when I double click on this, you'll see that this is at negative 8 dB. The primary kick's at -2. So I've dropped that by almost 6 dB, or a little over 6 dB, to help emulate and better complement this original break. Once you've tested out that you've got the alignment right and it still doesn't sound good to you, maybe sounds a little off, or doesn't sound exactly what you're looking for, it might just be the drum sample selection in itself. So you might not be getting the right drums to complement what you already have. They might sound good by themselves. They might have nice elements. If you're going through different packs, there may be certain kick drums that stand out to you, but in relation to what you already have in place, it might not be the best fit. And so in those cases, what I would recommend is just testing out several different kick drums or snare drums to complement what you have. So once you have the pattern down, then you can just swap the drum samples, just put it on loop, like I have here, and just continually substitute in new samples, and just a lot of experimentation and testing. It's kind of a brute force way to do it. It doesn't always have to be like a super technical technique to do it. If it sounds good, it sounds good. So don't dismiss that as an option, just to go through several different kicks to get one to work well with your break. And then if you still feel like it needs something else, then maybe even bring in another kick drum or whatever to supplement it. I'd already mentioned velocities in relation to the velocities of the drums in the break, but also when you're layering individual one-shots, maybe you're layering 2 or 3 different one-shot kicks together, make sure that you're paying attention to the individual velocities of each of those sounds. They may not all need to hit down right at the same level. You may want to bring down one of the kicks 5 or 6 dB. You may want to have one that's a little more prominent. One of the tips that I mentioned in the video that you commented on, the 5 tips for using drum breaks in hip hop beats video, is using an EQ or filter to filter out those frequencies. So you can still get the grit and you can get some of the elements from the break, but you can layer your own sounds and not have to worry as much about phasing when you filter out or EQ out those frequencies. So again, you just can put a high pass filter. I covered it in that tutorial. Or you can identify, if you want to find exactly where that kick's hitting, you can use a frequency analyzer and then be able to just kind of dip out whatever range. Those are a couple different approaches that I use quite often. And then you can kind of dictate where those kicks come in. And so if your one-shots are a little bit off from the groove in the break, then it won't make that much a difference because most of that frequency has already been removed. And so your drum samples will be prominent, and it will more than likely remove any kind of weird sound that you would get with conflicting drum hits. So the next example, I just wanted to show a standard 2-bar MIDI drum pattern. I've got 2 kicks layered, a snare, just a simple pattern, the exact same pattern as I had up above. All these drums are included in the Drum Sample Pack Volume 3. I'm going to play back this loop. I'm first going to mute out the second kick, so you're just hearing this first kick and snare, and then we'll get into the next step. So I picked another kick to layer for this tutorial. I'm going to play this back. Now both of these kicks are enabled. Okay, and this sounds okay. I do hear, I've got headphones on and I do hear it being off just a bit. I can hear that maybe one of the kicks is hitting down just a little bit before the other. And so one thing you can do in MIDI, you can go in and look at those individual samples just like we did in audio where I was nudging over and shifting the audio information. But I can go into each of these samples and see, okay, this kick is hitting down pretty much. This is starting the waveform here. If I zoom into the second kick, you're going to see that there's a little bit of dead air right here. And so in this case, what I would do is I would play this loop back and I would experiment. If I felt like this was a little bit off, I would slowly take this and I would just keep nudging this over and get this to a place where those kicks I feel like are more aligned, even though I'm not seeing it visually because it's in MIDI and I'm not able to actually look at the waveforms together. I'm just using my ear. But I'm taking that extra dead space and I'm just kind of getting it closer to where I feel like those kicks are aligned. So I'm just going to play this back on repeat. I'm first just going to sweep through and actually cut off some of this initial kick so you can just kind of hear this at different places in this waveform and kind of hear different ways that the kicks are sounding together. Then I'm going to pull this back and find kind of a sweet spot or where I feel like they sound good together. That sounds okay. I may play around with it more depending on when other elements come into the track. You may want to adjust your drums later on, but that sounds okay to me right now. You can notice just a huge difference just from like the milliseconds of variation in this, just by shifting this over just a very minimal amount, how much difference it can make the way that the two kicks sound relative to each other. And then in addition to that, maybe one of your kicks you want to be more prominent or less prominent, and so you can adjust the velocities. That's not going to help with alignment, but once that's right, then getting the levels and things like that. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're stacking multiple samples like this, everything's going to go up in volume. Me, I like to already listen to my tracks and create my beats kind of at a loud level anyway, and so when I start adding a lot more sounds, then it starts pushing everything up in the red, and that's okay most of the time. Something might sound off to you and it may just be bringing the level down more so than a phasing issue or whatever else. Of course, there's other advanced things that you could do in terms of shaping and molding with EQing, maybe even putting an attack or some sort of compression can change the dynamic of what those drums are going to sound like. So again, just to recap, number one, make sure that all your hits are aligned. Make sure that there's not any offset, whether you're working in MIDI or working in audio. Use this little sweeping technique that I just showed, or get in and actually physically look at the wave formats and get in and shift these over to get them to sound right and align them properly. That will fix a lot of your issues. Getting the appropriate sounds that are going to work together. If you have 2 kicks, 3 kicks that have a lot of sub bass or have a lot of certain frequency range, that might be too much. You might need to either change the velocities of those individual kicks or just take some of them out and use different alternate drum samples to help complement them. Paying attention to velocities in all aspects, whether you're matching the drums in a break or just trying to layer individual one shots. And then again, a technique I use a lot specifically when layering drums with a break is to just remove, either dip out that kick frequency or just kind of do a high pass filter like what I have here. You can still get the grit, you can still get the groove from the break, but then when you go to layer your own sounds, you're not going to have that confliction, you're not going to have as many type of problems like that. If you made it this far and you enjoyed this video, if this helped out at all, feel free to give it a thumbs up. I would appreciate it. If you're new and you like this type of video or you like tutorials, beat making videos, music production related video content, feel free to subscribe for weekly updates. I want to say thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.